I made up my mind 1,000 times to keep my eyes either on the road beneath my feet or on the black sky in front of me, not looking back at all, especially over my shoulder, but my eyes kept drifting there. The chanting of God was going on with the mouth, but those words remained, even he could not hear them. There were other sounds in the ears. Poppy leaves, howling wind. Let me have someone accompany me these 50 steps, he was praying very fervently. But the narrow road ahead remained empty. Big trees on either side, branches now swaying in the wind, rustling leaves. The sound of footsteps was faint at first, but became more and more distinct by the moment. Someone was coming behind him. At 20 paces, then 15 paces, then 10 paces, Jace yearned to look back, but he didn't dare. He didn't know what was coming from behind. Even the sound of footsteps is human. Even if it is like a step, is it sure that the person walking on that step will be the same? He had heard that. He had heard that with desperate efforts he suppressed the facts he heard deep in his mind. Now do not want to remember them at all. The thought of jumping out suddenly came to his mind, but if there was no man in pursuit, if it was in the tree, then it wouldn't do any good for him to run. It would come like the wind, it would move like a shadow. Footsteps came very close, passed over him, a middle-aged man absorbed in his thoughts was walking. He didn't even notice Jace, who was hurrying along the road. He went on his way. Jace's held breath came out like an explosion. The clenched fists of the hands were opened. The pounding of the chest gradually subsided. The last turn went backwards. A line of lights began to appear. Their village land was washed away in the flood, and after a year or so of digging, they got this land. 2 rooms in the description, but only 2 closets and a small outside. The world is like a game of loot. These houses had sprung up overnight in the dark. This area is outside the city. It would have been ridiculous to even imagine that someone would ever come to live here, but now there were rows upon rows of small houses. The world was created. Jace, his parents, and his sister lived in one of the tenements. When a man is drunk, he becomes helpless. People living here were like that. Not careless, but careless. There was a place of one's right, a roof over the head. Now no one would say go from here. That was the only satisfaction. This colony was the last. Beyond was the rocky Mal and beyond that the barren, bodacious hill. A rivulet on the hill ran 100 and 150 feet. There were thick bushes on both sides of it. Now in front of the houses, in small compounds, small gardens were blooming. Bananas, roses, evergreens, and some other plants. The coconut trees were still small. Even the owners of those gardens used to sit in the evening, a newspaper fluttering in hand. Children used to run in front. In the evening, the wind would come howling across the barren forest. Used to slide down the empty hill. The trees on the side of the drain were shaken, and the doors and windows of the new houses were shaken, like an animal with fleas. In summer, the atmosphere would be gray by blowing dust. During the rainy season, the clouds burst and the water was watered. As dusk fell, the sky seemed to expand. The hours of the night clothes were unfolding. At every moment the starry sky, floor after floor, the already small houses became even smaller. It was like sitting down with one's head bowed down. But the lives there, burnt by the fire of the accident, were careless. The mind was hardened. These liquid inventions had no place in their arid world. There was a kind of numbness. Jace was an exception, he thought. He knew that the people who came here in droves did not like them. Not to the wind, not to the hill, not to the trees. The harmony that they used to have with each other had now stopped. They did not want these houses. Jace had never spoken to anyone as the wind buffeted them, the trees shaking their heads to encourage him, and the hills seemed to shake in place. He did not dare. Mom won't know, and Dad. All he knew was that he would be angry. The wind rose, the resin on the hill began to fly, the flags of the trees began to flutter, and he went into the inner room and hid himself. Jace grew up, started going to school, and started reading books. But this information, the mind certainly, was rarely forgotten, never faded. On the contrary, it increased. As he knew them, they knew him. He was being watched. This is a new addition. The four of them had gone to the cinema in the village. The movie was released on 9. It took half an hour to get to the bus stop, and by the time they finally left the bus terminus to come back home, it was past 10 o'clock at night. He was coming to the side for the first time after dark. He had walked this road many times in the morning or evening with his mother. But this is the first time at night. The road leading to the colony was through the bush. No one had planted the trees in a row. The area had been paved with stones lying on it, and now a paved gravel road. There were 3 or 4 pointless turns on the way. The corporation had lights, but the light from one did not reach the other. The middle part was completely dark, beyond the light of the lamp. On arrival, the next part felt even darker and sweeter. Jace noticed for the first time that night the difference between the trees that had looked green during the day, swaying softly in the wind, and now stood in the dark, nodding to themselves, occasionally shaking their branches. He did not understand what the difference was, but he understood the kind of difference. It was the same kind of wind that hit the door late at night. The hills and streams were companions of that wind, and so were these trees. They didn't want these people. When the people came, the lights came, the light came, the traffic increased, and then their eternally dark path was closed. Jace had no idea who they were, what they might be doing with each other in the dark, but his sense of their existence was real, intense. That night's journey was a mere coincidence. Jace started going to high school, but everything was fine as long as he came home from the daylight, sweltering sun. This deep-seated memory was awakened when Mark fell short when classes started and he was late to return home. Nevertheless, he continued down that dark road. Until then he had no idea I was thinking about school and home. In the middle, when his gaze went straight up, it suddenly caught some stealthy, unexpected movement. And then he became even more cautious. Then he became acutely aware of all these whispers, signals, and counter-signals, the crackling, indistinct sounds of stealthy movements in the dark. For a moment he stood where he was and then ran towards the house. Until the end, the mind was imagining that they too had realized it. Eyes hidden in the dark green leaves above are watching his panicked run. One to another, another to a third, with such elbows, twisting and twisting the branches, drawing each other's attention to him. A sudden gust of wind from the leaves of the trees is also a part of the wind coming down the hill. He too has come to see the boy running through the tree line. And that wind has very fast legs. Jace was running down the road as something invisible but rustling followed him, keeping in step with him behind a line of trees. He reached home in Dappa tank. Don't want evening lessons? What does that mean? The father was talking nervously. Daddy, I'm afraid to come down that road. I'm afraid. What are you scared of, a baby? You've grown so big that now I'm really afraid. Are you sitting on the road to be afraid? No. Don't you? Ware Ladoba. Not to study. Don't need tuition. Laziness of all. He managed to raise money for tuition somehow and now says is afraid father, not really his father had no time to see his white, sweaty face, frightened eyes, quivering lips, clenched fists. Already fed up. Life was black and white. There was no middle ground. There was no way they could understand their son's problem. Fear must be a study. He said timidly, read the book carefully and you will be less afraid. Jace remained silent with a grimace. And when his father went to work, he went to his mother and cried. Mother had heard the father's conversation from inside. She held Jace close. She said, baby, if you're afraid to call on God's name, God says there's nothing to be afraid of. Jace's small mind didn't know the nature of his fear and had no knowledge or experience of godlike faith. His mother's preaching was done out of love, the truth, but he doubted how useful it would be. His mouth remained open. The last hour of school came, and as they began to disembark, the dark evening danced before Jace's eyes. What little attention he had for studying was now gone. After school, he would go to the master's house for tutoring. Those hours were pure hell. Half an eye on the clock. Master would call twice to bring him to his senses. But outside the light was fading, dark shadows were spreading, and Jace's fear was rising with them. Enough for today. The master said that Jace used to run to the bus stop with the books tightly packed in the bookcase. Evening time. Crowd everywhere. As soon as one bus went wrong, the rush would increase and then the lights would be on when we finally got on the bus. The glass-fronted, brightly lit, warm bus was crowded with people. How safe he felt in that crowd. I thought this journey should continue like this and never end. That dark road should never come. He used to look at the people around him. How contented and carefree they looked. How he envied them. If only we were so big. I used to think, but how long was that greatness? There was this black valley on the way. He was losing faith that he would ever overcome it. He had to get off the bus at the last stop. For so long, how could the bus, which was so full, become empty? People scattered in 10 directions. With furtive glances, Jace kept watching to see if anyone would turn to him one day to join him, but mostly not. How safe was the glare on the highway? How unpleasant it is to turn away from him and go down the dark road. But if you wait, it will be late. This injection was in the mind. Then finally he would step on that narrow path with Haya. The last bit of light would disappear. A narrow strip of blue-black sky above and rows of trees on either hand. Sometimes there was a moon, but he never knew whether that light was good or bad. Could pitch darkness or crazy moving shadows? At first, the trees let him in well. And then when it is surrounded from all sides, it starts to crack. Some kind of joke was going on between them. And once this poppy grows among them, then some others come and stand behind the tree. It was these shapes that Jace truly feared. Vaguely seen, running like the wind, gliding from patch of shadow to patch of shadow, shapes hiding behind the trees and peeking out from time to time were gods he didn't believe in, but he muttered with his mouth. To look forward as if caught in a steel grip, another turn, then a single turn, and then the lights. Wonder if this daily traffic does not affect the health. The color of the cheeks went down, the cheeks rose, and the appetite disappeared. Dawkins started to wake up. See how dry Jace looks right now? One Sunday, Mother said to Father. They were eating together. What happened to Dry? He said without looking up. not even eating properly now. Jay stole the limb as Dad's neck came up. Why? Isn't it sweet to get a Happy Meal? Jay said nothing. He lowered his head and began to push the plate full of grass into his stomach. Mother said after a while, "What are you doing to him like that? You only care about this." I am not pampering. I see what he looks like when he comes home from school in the evening. He is pale, he is panting, he is wiping his sweat like, "Did you come back to teaching?" But why not send it in the morning? I'll make him eat early. Didn't it happen last time? He'll have to fetch it alone in the morning. Master asks for $20. Where will we get it? His eyes turned angrily to Jace. I'm not. Did you say that you will listen to your mother's ear? You get all the compliments there. He hasn't spoken a word to me, huh? The mother said in a firm voice. I am the one who sees Bapta every day. He said in a scornful voice. The fear at first, if you avoid it, the fear will never go away. Jay said nothing. His neck was down. The sun leaned toward Capricorn. The day grew shorter. The wings of night spread further. At 6 o'clock the lights came on and the streets were full of people. The traffic also began to decrease. It was not fun to walk around in the bitter cold. Better to have a closed, warm house. The master was making up for the lost time during the festival vacation. He started getting late for classes. A small soul began to grow. The stress on the mind while walking on that road every day was growing. That small body was being stretched beyond its limits. The marks of the strain were showing on the face and body. The face became paler, the eyes appeared larger. The appetite for food became less. The sleep became more disturbed. And finally that night came. She was bound to come sometime. Jay stood at the mouth of the dark road. He caught sight of the half-lit strip stretching dimly in front of him, and all his courage failed him. He should not step on that road. Every day horrible shapes came to my mind. They were suppressed with effort, and every day they came up with a sudden bounce in my mind. They had occupied the entire space in front of them. They were hanging from the branches of the trees. They were peeping from behind the trees with their ugly faces. Their smoke-black bodies moved from one shadow to another. They were waiting for him, waiting for him. Jace closed his eyes tightly, but they could not be kept away by just closing their eyes. On the contrary, their lines became more pronounced. Time was running on, getting late, but the heart did not dare. The anguish in the mind finally flowed from the eyes in the form of tears. Mom! Mother! He cried. But Mother was far away beyond the dark trees. There was their home. Warm, lighted, safe, but far. How far? How far? Jay staggered at the mouth of the road. He was hoping that someone would come. The next bus was coming in 20 minutes. Until then, somehow he was patiently held. The lights of the bus were visible from a distance. A bus carrying smiling people, light, boredom and life came and stopped at the stop. The ritual is done. Jace had a hopeful eye on the descenders. But as the people dispersed, his face fell as not one turned in his direction. The bus filled up once again and sped off in the dark. Only darkness and solitude remained. Jace took one last solitary glance down the street. But no one wanted to come. He was quite alone. And now he had to go that way. Now it is useless. His mind was telling him that something crazy was about to happen. No one listened to him or believed him. Oh God, he was purring and walking down the road. Little steps were falling. There was a movement here, a noise there, but his neck was not turning. One more turn, one more turn. Unbeknownst to him, he had started running. He took the turn hard and came to a complete stop. They were standing in front of him. Hiding for so long, peeking behind the tree alone in the dark. Laughing, sneaking behind him, they were now out in the open. Had come for him. His breath caught in his chest for a moment and then came out in a loud, long burst of screams, "Mother!